Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to another face cam video. That's right, I'm here in person, as you can see, to talk about some awkward life moments. This is something which I feel like I have an above average amount of, that honestly, they're a little bit painful to think about. This is a thing I'm sure everyone has, where there's a moment that's like, why did I think about that? And I figured it'd be kind of interesting to share some of these with all of you, either as like a fun experiment for me, or because maybe you'll all enjoy it. Either way, I hope you do all enjoy the video. You can like it if you do, because it helps out the channel a lot, and, feeds the wife and kids. Remember, blood's on your hands if you don't do it, so just keep that in mind as you leave a rating on the video. So with that said, let's get straight into talking about what I mean by an awkward life moment and why they're kind of painful. And, the bit easiest example is just the first one I can think back to, which is when I was maybe like 7, 8, 9, 10, something like that, because I was in my cousin's house, I walked into their living room, and I saw what I thought was my cousin on the sofa, and I said like, oh, what are you doing there being so lazy? You should go do this thing or that thing. Like, I basically called them lazy, like, loudly, and, it was, because they were laying down on the sofa, like, watching TV or something, and it actually turned out, because I had bad vision at the time. In fact, I had bad vision until I was like 15, because I wear contacts now, but I didn't till then. I just kind of didn't see things. It actually wasn't my cousin, it was my cousin's dad. Don't ask how I made that mistake. And it was, my cousin's dad, just after a long day of work, was napping on the sofa, like, between shifts or something, and he just kind of was woken up by it and said, like, oh, hey, Andrew, and I was like, oh, why did I do this? And then I kind of walked out the room backwards, and it's funny, because I think that it's an easy extension of, like, oh, yeah, that's an awkward life moment, where suddenly, you've got this, it's only, like, a minor inconvenience for the people around you, but for you, it's this worst big thing you've built up in your head, and that's why I wanted to share 3 of these stories with you, like I've been doing on a semi-regular basis here. So the first one is one that was like from a Halloween party like 3 or 4 years ago. I might mention it on stream sometime, but it was a really, really terrible story because basically, it was the first Halloween party I went to with a girlfriend at the time. It was one of my first like long-term girlfriend, or the first long-termish girlfriend. I don't know how you define long-term, but it was like, that sort of thing where I was like, oh yeah, why don't you come along too? And it was like this fun little event. And because we're 18, or because I was 18, I just turned 18 and most people there had too, it was like, oh yeah, and then something, let's drink alcohol, as you can imagine, Halloween party. It all makes sense, right? So yeah, that's just a key detail because, it was a fun party. We had a lot of fun. There was a lot of like weird stuff with like, we went to the guy's house at first and like, even though there was people in there, he's like, oh yeah, you don't come in yet. We said it was starting at 7, but like, let's wait till other people come before you come in, because the host just didn't like me at all. But that's not too important to the story. What is important is when we left the party at like maybe 1 a.m, I had to go sleep at my girlfriend's house because her house was like half an hour walk away, and my house was like really too far away to get to. So we decided to go to her house, and the whole walk home, like, I'm just pretending like everything's perfectly okay, like this is just a normal interaction, date style thing, whatever, and like, even though I'm like swerving left and right, because clearly, too much of the drinking at the party or whatever, but I'm just like, I'm doing that, but I'm still like pretending, at least pretending outwardly, in my head, obviously, but outwardly I was just like doing this terrible thing, but I thought in my head, I was like, yes, I'm very believable right now, this is entirely fine. So yeah, I was like swerving left and right, getting worse and worse, by the way, because apparently more was sinking or something. And then when we get there, after like barely being able to like make it up the stairs and like getting into that, the bed and being like, yep, let's undress, let's do this whole thing. Like as that whole thing's happening, I'm like, oh, I'm gonna look up and see what's going on over there. Oh, that's kind of, oh, okay, well, and throwing up. So yeah, that moment I was like, oh, it wasn't even like a, like a cat hairing up. It's like, and something happens. It's like in my head, it was just this like long stream, and it's like, I am so sorry that I just threw up, and then another stream, and then like, I try one more time, and I just see the look of like, like the annoyance almost in the head, and I'm like, and then one more time it happened, and that was an awkward life moment, because what was going to be a, presumably excellent, well, I mean, I don't know how excellent it would have been as an evening, but what could have been an excellent evening turned instead into me throwing up all over the bed, and then I believe I don't actually remember anything else off that moment. I just remember throwing up a lot, and then presumably sleeping somewhere else that night. So there is a fun, awkward life moment that, could have been something, but wasn't something, and maybe that's like a life lesson, like, don't drink too much, because sometimes that happens. So, with that said, let's move on to the second little one, which is actually that I've watched the wrong movie twice now, and I know this sounds like, like, that's not really that awkward, but it's one of these things where I feel like it's such a tiny thing to just, like, get this corrected, but I haven't done it both times, and I've almost not regretted it. So, the first time I went to watch some it was like the worst movie that had been out in cinemas for a while. I was like, I'm gonna go watch this, and I bought my ticket for it. I go to the person, they say, oh yeah, it's that one over there. Like, they didn't say the one on the left, the right, or the center, because there's 3 screens on each side of my local cinema. So I was just like, oh, it's in that one, is it? And I walk into the cinema, I sit down in my seat, and like, ads are playing, and I'm like, oh, I'm 20 minutes late. I tried to show up like just before, like, the minutes go till the movie. I was like, oh yeah, well, maybe there's a lot of ads here. So I sat through like maybe half an hour of them. I'm like, oh, this can't be right, because then it shows up saying like, Jack Black's what was that movie he did recently? Goosebumps. It was Jack Black's Goosebumps. It's like, oh, this is not aimed at me. This is not my, nothing about this is correct, but I guess I'll just sit here and watch it. And I did, and it was an okay movie. And the second time, again, this sounds terrible, but it's like, I tried to watch Star Wars The Force Awakens. It was either The Force Awakens or it was Rogue One. I think it would have been, I guess, earlier this year, so Rogue One was that. But yeah, I tried to watch the new Star Wars movie. And what actually happened is, like, I went to go buy my ticket, bought it just fine. Apparently he must have misheard, because it will come up in a second. As I go past the dude, and he's like, oh yeah, well, this is actually not for, like, the correct movie. And I'm like, if I go back there and I get it changed, that's going to be a lot of steps. I have to admit that I somehow said Train Spotters instead of, like, Star Force Rogue One. And I'm just like, I'm just going to go watch this movie regardless. And, like, if you say so. So I walk in, and I watched Train Spotters too, and it was actually a pretty good movie. But it's one of those things where I feel like it shouldn't be such a big deal just to go and speak to another person and say, look, I made a mistake, I misspoke, can we get this exchange? But in my head, it's this giant thing of like, oh god, you're gonna have to speak to them, they're gonna... I really hate the whole idea of like social interaction. I'll do it at the level where I'll watch the wrong movie, if, instead of speaking to a human, if I can, sometimes. And I know that sounds terrible, but Train Spotters 2, I think it was, actually a pretty good movie, whereas Rogue One, it's obviously going to be available on like Flames or something soon, so really, I made the correct decision here, I think you'll find. And yeah, let's move on to the final little kind of like, I guess this goes back to the same theme as the first one, because it's one that I still think back to and I think any one of these events could have changed very, very slightly, and it would have made a lot more sense, but yeah, none of them did. So yeah, it was basically, so I met this girl for the first time after said long-term relationship really fell apart. I wonder why. Maybe it was throwing up in the bed. But no, basically, it was like the first time I'd been on like some form of like proper date in like a very, very long time. And, that was a fun thing. We went to I think it was a fish restaurant and then like to an arcade. It was a fun evening. And at the end of it, because again, I'm like in some place far away from home and she is too. She's like, oh yeah, well, I'll call up my dad or something. And I'm like, okay, just before you do then, oh, goodbye, I'm going to go be on my way. And what actually happened, I don't know how this happened, I don't know how, like, I can make how anyone can make a mistake this big, but I was like, oh yeah, well, this is clearly the moment, like, I think the leaving on the first date, where you do the kiss, right, that's how you do the thing, so, like, I leaned in, and somehow, it just kind of, like, missed, like, I don't know how to describe the physics of what happened, but it's like going past it almost, and it's like, the moment, like, I missed it a little bit, I made this weird noise, I don't even understand, I was like, yeah, like, G-N-E-H, like, yeah, and then my head it's like, oh, I did not mean to do that. I don't know where that noise came from, but this is kind of weird. And then I was like, yeah, goodbye then. And I kind of slowly started walking away. And then like, again, without explaining anything, just being like, yeah, walk away. And and I look her up behind me and she's like, turn to the left or I was on the phone or something. And that's when I sprint away as fast as I can because it's this giant parking lot. And I don't want to do the whole like walk, have her see me, like maybe look back and see her. So I just sprinted away and I realized, retroactively, like that is probably the weirdest thing I've ever done. Like, somehow misread something, done something wrong, could have fixed it and maybe actually done it properly, but instead made a noise and ran away at the top speed I could. And I figured, that's painful to think about, and maybe you enjoyed hearing it. Again, I think this would be like a fun little experiment of like, oh yeah, what is it like when you try and share these weird things you had? Because I think as a life tip, if you build these things up, they'll build up bigger and bigger, but really it's not so bad. It's not so bad to make noises and run away, or to throw up in people's beds, or just to watch the wrong movies, because, going back, 20 seconds and saying that you made a horrible misunderstanding, that maybe that's a lesson or something. But anyway, hope you all enjoyed the video. Like it if you liked it, share it if you really liked it, subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll see you next time.